Hello, welcome to Retrospective podcast, where we have short, unedited, honest and unscripted podcasts with people from various backgrounds, including theatre, film and science. Today, I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Connor Southwell, who's a sports journalist at the Eastern Daily Press. How are you, Connor?
Hi, yeah, I'm good, thank you. Yeah, how are you?
I'm good, thanks. Yeah, I'm not too bad. Connor, one of the things I like about your reporting is that you bring a lot of passion and energy to your articles, and also your video podcast that you do with Pinkham. And it's a really lovely way to sort of connect not only the local fans, but in my case, the international Norwich City fans. So thank you very much for that. Could you tell us a little bit about your background and your education and how you ended up working with the EDP?
I think in terms of the final part of that question, how I ended up working with them, I probably kind of fell into it a little bit. But in terms of my background, probably fairly traditional, really, in terms of just went through the education system in England, which is sort of primary school, high school. And then I was in my first year actually at university after sort of going through sixth form. And then, this job that I have now opened up and I saw it, and there was part of me that thought, do I apply for it? Do I not? And I think in the end, I kind of thought, if I don't, then I'm going to regret it. And I think I probably did that without any sort of expectation of actually getting it, because I was 19 at the time. So, and it was, you bracket it definitely as my dream job. So I did it and kind of went, well, at least I've done it now. I have no regrets, whatever. Then got to the first stage, then got to the interview stage, and then got offered it. And in many ways, it was a wonderful surprise. So, yeah, kind of fell into it that way. But it's been the best thing that I've ever fallen into, I think, for sure.
Wonderful, wonderful. And of course, you struck gold with your first game because you covered the remarkable 3-2 victory over Man City in the Premier League. And I mean, so much has happened since then. But could you just cast your mind back to that day? What was it like? How were you feeling? What were the emotions of that occasion?
Yeah, it was an incredible game to start with. I mean, one that I don't think I would have forgotten in a hurry anyway, but certainly one now that is going to be sort of in my brain forever. I think it was just remarkable, and there was a whole lot of surrealness around it because, as you say, it was my first match day, so there was trying to cope with all of that aspects and exactly what the job entailed and what I needed to do and what I needed to fill in and different things like that, and all of that happened whilst Norwich were probably sort of performing one of their best results, certainly in their modern history, maybe ever, given the context. So it's difficult because match days and you don't really have time to think about them. It's only really when you walk away from Carrow Road and the laptop's shut and maybe you're on your way home that actually you can sit back and think, wow. And that was certainly one of those occasions. I left our offices after doing the podcast, and it was all a bit of a sort of whirlwind 4 or 5 hours. And as I was kind of making my way back home, that was when I thought, yeah, this is pretty special day, both in terms of what Norwich City have just achieved, but equally for me as well. So yeah, it's surreal, and how the world has changed since. I mean, it's been an incredible 18 months really in this role, and not one that I think I could have scripted, to be honest.
Right, yeah. I come from a sort of a theatre film background, and we often talk about the relationship between performer and the audience, especially in live theatre. So how has it been covering the games in the stadiums without the supporters?
Horrendous, in a word. It's not been a pleasant experience, and I think from my perspective and my colleagues and everyone who gets to go into the ground, it's a privilege, of course, and we're very fortunate. But equally, there's that guilt element, I think, of actually being allowed in when 27,000 people who usually pay for the privilege and do it because they love it, aren't allowed to be there. And the nature of it has been that I've covered every single home game at Carrow Road, but I've only sort of done 2 away. It sort of depends on how many passes we can get. So I've also had that experience of following along from home and watching on a screen, and in many ways I've sort of preferred that because it's probably a better experience in terms of being in the ground behind closed doors. Is horrendous. There's no tension, there's no tempo. there's some good aspects in terms of you can hear the players communicating, you can hear the managers communicating, you can hear how players interact with referees, how coaches interact with referees. So that element's very positive, but it's just a very sterile, not particularly nice place to be. But equally, like I say, you have to put it in the context that you're very privileged to be there. So there's that side of it as well. So it's quite a difficult balance, and it's quite difficult, I think, to put into words. But yeah, just a very weird experience, and not one that I'm particularly enjoying, but of course, extremely privileged to be there. So yeah, the strange sort of trade-off, like I say.
Yeah. Of course, we're having this remarkable season, and it's unfortunate that the fans can't enjoy it. But what have you made of Norwich's season thus far?
It's been pretty faultless, hasn't it? I think mine that little blip. I think in terms of the way they run the club and the way that they operate, this is probably beyond expectations. I'd say certainly from supporters, probably from me personally as well. If you want sort of my opinion on it, but I don't get the sense there's a lot of surprise from within the club. I think they probably expected to be where they are. Maybe not by the points tally they are or the margin they are, but it's been an incredible effort. I think when you consider the context and the fact that they lost 10 consecutive games on the spin, didn't really score a goal. The atmosphere was so low, it was so gloomy, and to sort of rise, I think from that context has been pretty incredible in the way they've done it. They just look so dominant, and they've almost been sort of validated, I guess, for the approach that they've kind of took. And even though they've lost a couple of key players, they've replaced them very well. So yeah, it's been brilliant. I think obviously now the next step people are going to look at is saying, well, you've got the blueprint for the Championship. Now it's about doing it in the Premier League. And I think this is a side that looks like a Premier League team playing in the Championship. And hopefully that bodes well next year. But obviously there's a lot of water to flow under that particular bridge, I think, before we can make predictions and stuff like that.
Now, this is kind of a follow-on question from that. So if Norwich, or when they go up, what do you think they need to add to the squad to improve it?
Good question. I think I probably would nail it down to 4 or 5 positions, and I think they're probably in a position. If you look at the Ben Gibson deal that's set to go through, if they get promoted, Dimitris Giannoulis as well, 8 million for Gibson, 6.2-ish for Giannoulis. That's already a fairly sort of hefty outlay in terms of Norwich. So you would expect that they would be able to not necessarily drive up their sort of deals by much, but maybe to around the 5-7 million mark. And that's a different sort of caliber of player I think you can get compared to 2 million, 3 million that they were spending before. So I think priority has to be either retaining Ollie Skip or finding a replacement pretty promptly. I think they probably need another centre-back, another striker, probably another midfielder as well. And then you're probably saying, well, if they lose any of their assets, then you need to cover those and replace them accordingly, which is going to be very tough. So it's a big challenge, and I don't think they're quite there yet. I think if they went up in their current guys right now, it would be very difficult for them to stay up. I think a lot of it will hinge on their recruitment, and you just hope they get it better than what they did last time. And I think lessons have been learnt internally. So I think that probably will be the case. But yeah, I would nail it down to 4 or 5 positions. I think by the large, this Norwich team is heading into the Premier League in a better state than maybe it did 2 years ago, with not just better options, but also more variety and more variation. I think that's probably what they lacked last time.
Right. Brilliant. And of course, talking about structure, Stuart Webber, who seems a very sort of astute guy, what has he brought to the club since he's been there?
A vision. I think when you speak to anyone about Stuart Webber, there's kind of this idea that he really grabs a club by its neck and drags it forwards. And that's what the sense I've got from Norwich, in terms of, if you think about when he arrived, that the squad largely was over, and he said this before, so I'm not speaking out of turn, but they were largely over age in terms of Norwich wouldn't be able to sell them for a profit, for a decent enough fee to keep the kind of finances ticking over. They were in a bit of a financial hole because they dropped out of the Premier League. They failed to bounce back instantly, and so they had this £20 million hole they needed to fill. There was a massive disconnect between the first team and the academy. It was essentially, if you imagine it like a bridge, that was very broken. There wasn't really anyone coming over that. The training ground was essentially a load of porta cabins in a field. There used to be a gym and a conservatory. It was very disjointed, very broken. Now you look at it, fully functioning academy. They've got assets. I mean, the fact we're talking about 3 or 4 players that potentially could leave after a promotion season is incredible, really. They've got an academy which is functional, which is bearing fruit. It's delivering talent to Daniel Farke's first team. And you've got a training ground that is remarkable, really, compared to where it was, and is also going to get better. I mean, we're talking about the addition of Soccerbot, which is a sort of fairly modern bit of kit that's cost them, I think, just under £1 million, which is going to hopefully revolutionise what they do in terms of their youth players, and they become the first English club to do that. So they're always looking to innovate, and I think that's really the key with Stuart Webber. When you don't have a lot of money, which Norwich don't, in terms of they're not bankrolled by a wealthy owner, particularly in the grand scheme of things. And of course, Delia Smith and Michael Wynne-Jones have money. That's not a secret, but comparatively to the rest of the English game, they don't have a lot. So when you don't have that money and you aren't, there isn't an owner pumping money into the club, and you're self-financing, you have to be clever. You have to do things in a self-sustainable way. And I think that's what Stuart Webber has brought. He's brought that foresight, ambition as well, and equally a vision that's been executed. So I think the job he's done and the way the club has transformed in really a fairly quick space of time, 3-4 years, is fairly incredible. And I think when in 10 years, 15 years, when we look back on this period, he will be a name that I think most people will remember pretty fondly for the work he's done.
Yeah, wonderful. And of course, I have to ask you about your infamous run-in with Robbie Savage. He's made some sort of disparaging remarks, I would say, against Norwich. So could you maybe tell me about your phone call on, was it 5 Live, Radio 5 Live?
Yes. Yeah.
The article that you wrote in response.
Yeah, it's difficult because I understand the game, so I understand how these things work in terms of, particularly if you're hosting that sort of show, you have to make comments to get people to phone in. I think that's very natural. And, in many ways, I have a huge amount of respect for Robbie Savage and the way he's transitioned from player to broadcaster. That's a very difficult transition to make, I think, for anybody. There's a reason not many people do it. So I'll put that out there first. But yeah, the comments, I think, were essentially that he didn't want to cover Norwich because it's miles from his house, and he didn't want to see Norwich promoted to the Premier League because they don't, if you want to put it in inverted commas, have a go, which essentially translates to spend a load of money, sign players for £30 million, which is fine. That's his opinion and that's a viewpoint. My perspective was merely trying to map out why those remarks are wrong and why Norwich are operating in a very different way. Because Norwich fans will know there was a transfer window not so long ago whereby Norwich bought Stephen Naismith. They bought him closer for massive, big fees for Norwich City, around £8 million, so £16 million outlay. And they were really hurt by that because they got relegated and they had essentially gambled the future of their club on a transfer window in a hope to stay in the Premier League, and it didn't work. They got relegated, and that's where this £20 million hole was born that I spoke about. And the only reason Norwich were really able to get out of it is because they produced a talent like James Maddison, and he was also bought in that transfer window, ironically enough. But I think it's just an understanding that, certainly from my perspective, and it is just my personal opinion, when teams do get promoted, I think about Sheffield United at the minute. They're a really good example. They go up, they spend a lot of money, and then they don't necessarily stay there for the long haul, and they come back down with a big wage budget. They haven't improved their training ground or their youth facilities. So what do they have to show for the promotion? Yes, they had a very good season last year, but in terms of long term, in terms of what you want to improve in terms of infrastructure and facilities, and to make sure that your club on a long term basis can survive in the Premier League, there's very little. I look at Bournemouth at the minute. Their accounts came out yesterday, and I mean, they're pretty shocking reading. I think I read that £60 million in debt. I might need to check that, but it just goes to show the lack of sustainability in football. And I think there's 11, 12 probably now with Bournemouth teams that have released their accounts from last season, and only one club made profit, and that was Norwich City. so it's a rarity in English football that a club is sustainable and it breaks even every year, and that's what Norwich have to do for the reasons I said about the owner, and that's kind of where this sort of perception of have a go, I think, is quite dangerous in many ways, because if a side Norwich goes up, spends 160 million and comes back down again, they're going to be in financial ruin. They're going to be fighting for their life. So it's just you have to sort of trade that off, I guess. Is promotion worth everything? Probably not. I mean, realistically, there is a ceiling to what Norwich City can achieve. Are they ever going to qualify for the Champions League? I would suggest certainly not in the near future. But equally, you can use that money, as Norwich have. You can build a better training ground. In the long term, that's going to help you develop better talent, sign better players, and improve. And that's the way you do it. And I just think it's probably quite lazy and probably quite easy just to throw that assumption out there without really thinking about what it means for individual clubs. So that was my response. It's a very long-winded way, but yeah, it was an interesting experience. I'll put it that way. And yeah, Chris Sutton, former Norwich striker, actually invited me on to talk about it, so I was more than happy to. And yeah, hopefully now there's a bit more context out there in the wider nation about Norwich City and the way they operate, because I think those misconceptions can be easily kind of put to rest.
All right, brilliant, fantastic. And also, you recently wrote an article about the nest that the Norwich City Football Club have helped invest in. And there was a lovely quote that you had in your article: commitment to serve the community they represent. And not every club does that in the country. What makes Norwich special in that regard?
Yes, it's a good point you make. I spoke to Jackie Thornton, who's head of development at CSF, and there was a nice little snippet in there, which is, I don't know other football clubs that do this. And I think that's a really, really powerful comment, actually, when you think about it. And yeah, their presence in the community. I think even when I was a young child, which not too long ago, but I used to go to sort of events in the community that they'd put on, and there was always a Norwich City badge. There was always someone in a Norwich City polo shirt or something putting on a session or helping youngsters, and that's something I think to be proud of. I think if you're a community club, then often that can kind of, certainly externally, sort of people look at you and want to sort of ruffle their hands through your hair, kind of thing. It's like, oh, bless them. And I actually think it's a really important component, particularly because of the geography of where Norwich City are. They're the only club in the county. So although it's Norwich, it's really Norfolk's club, and they have to represent all of that. And it's a really broad, vast county as well. So I think a strong presence within that is key. And it's a wonderful facility, actually. I went down there on Friday to have a look around. £4.6 million they've raised, and it looks absolutely incredible. And they've done that through, like you say, matching with Norwich have put in £500,000. Supporters have helped raise money. Ex-players have put their hands in their pockets and helped out. So it's a wonderful thing. And yeah, like you say, commitment is the key word. Commitment to the community. It's all very well saying you want to be a community club. You have to show that in practice, and I think that's what this new facility does. And I have no doubt in my mind. I mean, at a low estimation, they expected that it was going to reach a further 12,000 people. There's no doubt in my mind that for generations to come, that will be a place that a lot of young people and a lot of Norfolk people use for various reasons, be it if they're elderly and feeling a little bit lonely, to meet up with people and reconnect. If they're young, to go and do a football session, not just football, other sports as well. So I think it's an incredibly powerful thing, and that is what football is about. It's about connecting people and community and bringing people on board. And if you do that, then actually someone who turns up in a Chelsea kit, an 8-year-old, might leave wanting to buy a Norwich shirt. And that's the key aim to it, isn't it? If you're seen to represent your community, I often think that's a two-way street. Your community will always be there to support you. And like you say, it's quite a rare thing, I think, in English football. And Norwich, I suppose you could probably say, are quite a rare club in terms of how they operate generally.
Okay, brilliant. So I'd like to just end the podcast on some fun questions. This is kind of a hypothetical question. Let's imagine the pubs have reopened, fingers crossed. It's late summer, and you're in a pub quiz team, and you have David Fraser and Paddy David your co-workers, but you can only choose one of them to be in your quiz team. Who would it be and why?
Oh, blimey. That's a good question. I think I'd probably lean towards Dave, probably, just because he's got some excellent stories that I think would be very good. Like contextually, he had a Hollyoaks audition and stuff like that. So I think that would be very useful, maybe. And also, I'm not someone with. I don't probably have a great general knowledge. I'm probably sort of confined to 2 or 3 areas. I think we'd probably complement each other quite well. Although, you know, if I was left with Paddy, I think we'd also do quite well. So, yeah, I'd lean slightly towards Dave, but yeah, Paddy would be good as well, I think. So I've sat on the fence, but yeah, I'd edge towards Dave, I think.
Brilliant, very diplomatic. Okay, last question. The strangest or funniest thing that's happened to you while you've worked at the EDP?
Strangest, I could probably wrap the whole year into that. I think I think if they'd have said in my interview, oh yeah, by the way, there's going to be a global pandemic in 6 months in, I think I've probably covered more games behind closed doors than I have with fans. But funniest, that's a really good question. I'm not sure I can really think of too much, to be honest. Well, I mean, we've had some good journeys in the car. I'll tell you about a strange one when we were going to. Can't remember where we were going to, but it was me and Dave in the car, and he was driving on the motorway, and there was some young folk behind us who maybe took issue with his lack of speed, even though he was complying with the speed limit. I'll hasten to add. And when he does pull over, eventually they decide to. I think it was a water bottle that they threw at the side of the car. So that was quite strange. That was a strange 10-minute period or so. But yeah, nothing really stands out. But I'm sure if I probably rack my brains, I could probably come up with a funny one. So I'll probably have to get back to you on that one.
All right, nice one. Okay, thank you, Connor. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I'll just chat to you afterwards. Thank you very much. Okay.